Story 1. Woman on the road. Once, when I was still working as a truck driver, I was with my co-worker Thomas, heading towards a city to make a delivery to a hospital. It was already night, but even then we could not stop driving that day. We were a bit late due to a blocking on the track a few kilometers ago. Thomas had just woken up, and was sitting in the passenger seat. It was very dark, for the clouds covered the moon. He and I were talking then, to distract and alleviate fear to traverse a desert highway as that, with that gloom ahead. Suddenly on a certain stretch, we noticed a figure in the middle of the dark road. As we approached, we realized that it was a woman all dressed in white. We only saw her at a glance. We couldn't see many details because of the speed at which we were traveling. We passed the woman and looked back. We found that she stayed in the same place, standing. Of course Thomas did not dare ask me to stop the truck, and come back to see why she was there, in that place at that time of night, alone. Then we left. We arrived at the hospital, where the cargo was unloaded. After the normal reception procedures of the hospital, we left the city to return to our starting point. On the way, we kept talking about the woman we had seen on the road, and we were arguing about what it might be. Amazingly, sometime later, when we got to the point where we had seen the woman in white on the way, much frightened us and amazed us when we saw that she was still there, stopped at the same place and in the same way. She was standing there, looking at us with a frightening look. We decided to focus on the truck headlights to try and see who or what it was. And when the headlights of the truck focused on her image, she simply disappeared on thin air. We all had our hair standing and shivering in our bodies then. And even today we comment this case, but we have no idea who or what was that woman in white. What she was doing alone in the middle of that road for so long, looking like she was waiting for us. Story 2. Something on the window. What I'm going to tell here happened to me one night during one of my many truck trips, and it was terrifying. About 30 years ago, I was a truck driver and drove along these country roads, but rarely traveled in the night, only when it was very necessary. Maybe avoiding night travels was some hunch about what might happen. Once I was traveling and it was already dusk. I was on the road with no traffic, and that meant not me taking charge of everything. When suddenly, I looked to the other side, and I swear that my heart went into my mouth and returned. What I saw made me shiver down to the last strand of my hair. There, at the other side of the door, outside the truck cabin, a young woman. In her position, she could only be standing on the stirrup of the truck. And she was staring at me, and with a serious glare. Her hair swayed in the wind and she had no expression. Her eyes were totally black and bulging, she was very pale and her mouth was very white. Terrified, I started to accelerate the truck even further and throw it from side to side to see if that would make her leave. The woman stood there, staring at me, and I was almost shitting myself. I did not know what to do. She laughed then. I wanted to open the door of the truck booth and jump off the truck from so much fear that I felt. Keep in mind that I was at almost 60 miles per hour. As if in a magic spell, she simply disappeared when I looked at the road and looked at her again. She was gone. I had seen strange things on the roads, such as dark shadows, but I had never felt so much fear in my whole life as I felt on this occasion. Story 3. Night trip. This happened several years ago, when I was 20 years old. I had just gotten my driver's license, and started working for my uncle, who had a carrier. It was a Thursday. I would make a delivery on a farm. I picked up the load in the city, and headed towards the farm, which was distant, about 140 miles, but it was worth it. I really needed to get distracted a little, and be without any worries about my family for a while. I was on the road for some time. It was almost 1 in the morning when the truck choked while going up a hill. He started to choke and jerk, until I stopped at the side of the road. I did not believe that it was happening to me, even though the truck was a little old. It was an old Mercedes trunk truck, which my uncle had already bought it used a few years ago. It was a lack of luck, because according to my calculations it would take another 30 to 40 minutes to get to the farm. The only thing I knew was that it was not diesel shortage, since the pointer was still scoring 3/4, and I had filled the tank on the way. I jumped from the truck, and even opened the hood. Keep in mind that at the time, I didn't have as much mechanical understanding as I have now. I was hoping only to see something loose or something I could easily fix. Unfortunately, I did not know much about diesel engines at the time. I wondered what to do in that end of the world. There was no light in the distance, no cars in sight. It was not a main road, but secondary. For the conditions the road was, it was not widely used because there was no light, and it was surrounded by woods on both sides. I had already closed the hood, and I was still thinking. I did not know what to do to get out of that mess, when I heard footsteps in the forest on the sides of the road. I tried to see something around me, but even with the headlights of the truck, I saw nothing at all. That already made me alert. I heard voices, but I could not even know where they came from. That's when I saw a man, followed soon after by a woman. But they walked without moving their bodies. When they got closer, I could see that in fact, they glided as if their foot stayed inches from the ground. They glided to walk around. That was enough for me to shake and crouch in fear behind the trunk of the truck. Now I could see them clearly, following the direction of the road. Going in the opposite direction I was going before the truck stopped. They were figures that were human, but they were not human in the way they walked, they just glided. As they passed by, I could see their faces. They were a woman and an old man, with completely black eyes and mouth. Their skin was pale and had a reddish color. I was totally scared and paralyzed with what I was seeing. I never believed in supernatural stories, I always thought people fantasized about things. I stayed for a little more time squatting. The figures had already disappeared for some time, but I simply did not react. It was when my knees started to ache, and then I started to move and think about what to do. Soon, I started hearing a strange noise. It was like a gargle, still far away, but no one was there. I realized it was coming from the woods, coming towards me. And that was all that I needed to react. I jumped into the cabin, got the doors locked, and realized I was crying in pure terror. My hands were shaking and wet. I tried to turn the ignition, and the truck miraculously turned on. And at the same time, I hear a strong bang at the ceiling of the cabin. I screamed in terror. After that, another bang on the ceiling, but I had not seen anything above the cabin before entering. They were also banging on the passenger's glass, as if someone was punching the passenger door and glass. I hit the first gear and accelerated with exaggeration. I had to have the balance to control the gears, because if the truck died on that hill, I think I would end up having a heart attack. I gripped the steering wheel as if it was my lifeline, and so hard that my hands ached. I was desperate. There was banging on the windows on the other side, and now, on the hood of the truck. Even so, there was nothing there. I cried desperately, and gritted my teeth as if it gave me some comfort. It was an uphill road, it was not too high, but for a heavy truck, it could not be worse. The banging continued. I kept trying to control myself, grabbing the wheel as hard as I could, and praying to get out of there. I was still in first gear. My biggest fear was to go to second gear and the truck end up turning off there. I waited for more speed, and set the second gear, although the engine was already asking for the third gear, because there was practically no ascent anymore. I was able to let the air out of my lungs as I came out of a curve and saw a descent. I no longer listened to the bangs outside the cabin. I started the descent, and engaged the third gear. The engine accepted without even choking, and moments later, I engaged the fourth. I saw that nothing unusual happened to the engine. Followed the road a little less scared, but enough to see that I was soaked in sweat, though it was a cold day. I was totally soaked, and the sweat of my forehead dripped so much that it fell into my eyes and burned. Finally, I took a road that now had some movement, even if rare. I followed a few more miles, checked the map that the company had provided, and saw that I was already arriving. When I arrived at the farm, it was almost 6 o'clock in the morning. The owner came rushing to greet me, because he knew I was on my way, and I would arrive at around this time due to the delay. When he looked at my pitiful condition, he saw that something horrible had happened. That's when he warned me that I was bloody on my shirt, part of the neck and in the corner of my mouth too. When I could, I looked in the mirror what had happened. With the degree of despair I was in, and in an attempt to get the fuck out of there, I remembered that I gritted my teeth and bit my lips. It made me hurt. It was a horrible experience. It seemed that I was going to die of fright, dying of a heart attack. I persisted with the company so that I could return on the main road, which would add another 2 hours to my trip. Before returning, persisted for taking the truck to a mechanical. After a conversation, the company consented. I took it to a local mechanic, and he did not find anything abnormal in the engine, saying it was in perfect condition. He deduced that some dirt was sucked into the tank, and partially blocked the truck injection. And the body of the cabin I thought was all wrinkled. It was totally normal. Story 4. The Creature. I would like to tell a story, which is by far the most sinister I have ever heard. I have a carrier in Colorado, and I like talking to some of the drivers. I do this to know the news of the road, and details of some deliveries made and on the trips made. Well, talking to drivers Jim and Richard, fellow travelers, I learned that they've already had some adventures together. Once, when they went on a trip, they decided to make the trip at night because they could unload in the morning, and reload in the afternoon going onward. They set out on the road, and when they arrived near the border with Utah, the clock was almost at midnight. They were already at a certain point on the road, in a place already very far away, with only a few hills around. Then, the two saw an animal to the right of the track. Thinking it was a donkey or a horse, the animals that are often seen on the edge of roads and can cause accidents, they slowed down a bit. As they passed the animal, they noticed that it was nothing of what they imagined. It did not seem like anything they could recognize. Jim hit the gas pedal, and tried not to look in the rearview mirror. But at the same time, he noticed that the strange animal was chasing and reaching the truck. As he looked to the side, he noticed that the animal was with him, and without any effort, it overtook the truck. It was like a very large dog, extremely ugly and deformed, with completely black fur. They described him as having the face of a bat. "What the hell is that thing, Jim?" "Look at its fur," said Richard. "I do not know, but it's not a good thing, because we're almost 60 miles an hour, and it does not even look tired." "What?" said Richard, while looking at the truck's speedometer. "Holy Mother of God! This can only be from hell." Suddenly, the creature slowed and went side by side with the truck. So, the creature looked at the driver with red eyes practically lit like fire, and started to turn into man. Then he entered smiling into the darkness of the side of the road, disappearing. I believe this was true, as neither Jim nor Richard travel at night anymore, nor do they accept jobs into the state border. They do everything to avoid having to go through that road when it is dark. To this day, they do not have any idea about what kind of animal that was, and how it did what it did at all. They just know it was not normal. To travelers, be careful. Maybe the animal did not attack them because of the cabin height, but if you travel by car or bike late at night and early morning around those parts, you never know what might happen. Story 5. Oklahoma. The fact that I am going to report happened to me in the year 2003. I keep this fact in my mind, and I will never forget it, because of the strangeness of the events. I worked as a truck driver at the time, and had a delivery to do in a town about 300 miles from where I was. As soon as I prepared the cargo, it was already 5 p.m., and so I left. I took the nearest dirt road in order to cut some way and shorten the trip. It was almost dark now. As the weather overcast was threatening rain, the night came quickly and became darker still. I was glad that my truck had great headlights, and there were still 3 more auxiliary headlights. I went a few miles down the road, and it was windy. The tree branches swayed a lot, which gave me a bad impression. Then it began to rain. I had been following the dirt road for a long time, until at some point I saw something lying on the road. It was a tree that must have been knocked down by the rain. I could not get through. Then I remembered that there was road split somewhere behind, miles ago, and I went back. Arriving on site, I found two more paths, one to the left and one to the right. I imagined that going to the right one would eventually lead me to the city, and there I could find the right path. Then I turned right, and moved on. I rode a few miles, but I was not sure anymore that the road would take me to the city. As I followed the path, I noticed strange lights in the sky. They were like neon, or sheets of soft lights, in bluish, greenish and red colors, and were far ahead, on the way. I thought it was strange, but I moved on. Moving forward a little more, I noticed that something strange was happening. It seemed that the darkness was increasing. Along the way, with the 5 headlights of the truck on, I saw the vegetation around and the details of the road. But at that moment there seemed to be nothing around. It seemed that I was on a road at the top of a mountain range, and that there was some kind of cliff or abyss around, for there was nothing to look around. At that point, I was frightened, so I stopped the truck and opened the window. I heard nothing, neither the wind nor the vegetation swaying, only the motor of the truck. So I got out of the cabin for a closer look, but I left the engine on to keep the battery charged, and all the headlights on to light up around. What I am going to tell you now is something atypical, abnormal, strange and bizarre. I bet nobody will believe it, but it did happen. There was nothing there. Simply nothing. When I say nothing, vegetation, stones, sky and even the road. I was stepping on the nothing. The headlights of the truck illuminated the area, but I could only see the truck and the headlights. There was no ground, sides, sky, and looking around it was a tar, a void, a pitch. Only darkness. I felt lost and distressed. I did not know what to do. I returned to the truck and noticed that no radio stations functioned, there was only static. I did not even know what to think or do. I was desperate. I thought about moving on with the truck, but I was afraid of falling into some hole because I could not see anything, there was nothing, and I did not even know where I was. So I turned off the truck and stood there with the radio on static for a while, and then I do not remember anything else. I believe I ended up either sleeping or fainting because suddenly, I heard a huge noise. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tractor in front of me. It was already morning, because everything was clear. The driver of the tractor, an old man, went down and asked, "Are you okay, kid?" I said I did not know, and I asked where I was, and he said, "You're on the road to Rattan." It was the road I was, before going back because of the tree. Then I thanked the man, moved on, and finally reached Rattan. I put diesel in the truck and continued my journey. To this day, I do not know what happened. I do not know if what has happened has to do with the lights I saw in the sky, or if it did not. I do not know what were those lights, and do not know what place was that I was stopped. It was not my delusion, because I do not use drugs, I do not smoke, I do not drink and I do not have any illness. I also did not fall asleep and dreamed all that, because I suffer from almost chronic insomnia and I was wide awake that day. But I guarantee that what I said really happened. From that experience, I never travel alone at night, especially in remote places without reference.